Okay, welcome everybody. Hi, it's Phil and Sue here. And I know I said I was going to record a Saturday session for you, but due to technical errors, also known as human error, uh, we didn't get it recorded. So what Sue and I thought we'd do is take a few minutes here to kind of go over what we covered on Saturday. And if you have any questions after watching this video, as always, you're more than welcome to send us an email and we'll try to answer your questions. Um, but let me just catch you up to where we are. Sue, I'll do that first and then I'll turn it over to you if that's okay.
Okay.
First session, we talked about building that liturgical year that's reflects your congregation's theology and things like that. So if you're a humanist, you might have a more humanist liturgical year. If you lean a little more towards the nature centered, you might have a more pagan-like liturgical year. If you're like an average UU congregation, you might have a mix of different traditions, and you might reflect some of those in your liturgical year. Just always, of course, being careful to not slide into that cultural appropriation trap. So, and then as part of that process, we're thinking about going around the year, having these once a month or every 6 weeks, or at least 6 times a year, every couple months, have these special thematic services that are tied to the year liturgically. Um, we suggest that you create a packet, which can be very simple, but something that's built around your theme. So if your theme is beauty for one of these services, you're going to want some poetry about beauty. You're going to want some stories about beauty. You might have a passage from a book about beauty, just things that you can share with your congregants that lift up that theme that we're talking about. Um, in the second session, we won't go a whole lot into this, but we talked about how you bring communal spiritual practices into your worship services that are built around that theme. Um, and that's where the Lectio Divina comes in. That's where the meditative singing might come in. And of course, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this, that's where the larger opportunities for silence come in. So rather than that moment of silence that's only 1 or 2 minutes long, you're building up to 5 minutes, or I don't know. What's the longest you've ever done of silence in a worship service, Sue? Have you gotten up to 10 minutes?
I've done 20.
20 minutes. Okay, so it's possible to really build up to a substantial amount of silence in a service. But what the point there is you're taking your already existing worship practices and figuring out how to approach them as a communal spiritual practice. And now, what we talked about in our last session is having small groups as part of that communal spiritual practice, but it's a little more intimate. So rather than doing it with your whole congregation, all your worship attendees, so you might have 20, 30, 40, I don't know how many people you have, 50 people there. We're talking about some small groups where you are doing a communal spiritual practice, which I think we'll admit grows out of group spiritual uh, direction practices. And that's where I'm going to hand it over to Sue, because Sue has a outline for how you do some of these groups.
Yes. Um, the first thing is, rather than calling them discussion groups, I call them reflection groups, small group reflection on the theme or on the particular topic to help people explore it deeper. We hope they've had a packet which gives them meditations, readings, contemplative questions, paying attention when you assemble that packet to its diversity, making sure that you have many different voices of different cultures, different groups. You have men's voices, women's voices, Black, Hispanic, Native, just a variety of different kinds of voices that speak to the particular theme, because some of them may speak to it differently, and that's important that people see the differences. But so The small group would be convened by a facilitator. Now, in my small congregation, the worship committee introduces the theme each month. The member of the worship committee leads the service, and then they convene the small group that month on the theme. So that's how we've done it. So all the worship leader committee members are trained in this small group process, but you can bring others in to train them. You can introduce it. You can have a script. But the way it starts is you gather 6 to 8 people. That's optimal. So if you have more than that you know are going to come, you need more than one facilitator and more than one space. They need to be able to be in a separate space. And if you're doing that, pay attention to people that are partnered so that they can go into different groups so that they've got the space to reflect on whatever comes up for them, and they're not looking over their shoulder to see whether the person they're with agrees with them or not. So you start with a group of 6 to 8 and you begin with silence, just some deep breaths and some silence. Minimal 2 minutes. And then some kind of guided centering activity. I've done the body thing where you feel the roots go into the earth and your head go up to the universe and your heart open up, but some kind of centering activity that brings your full presence, that includes body, mind, emotions, and spirit to whatever we are to consider. Whatever the focus of your meditation that you use, it could be Lectio, it could be a guided meditation, it could be a mindfulness exercise, but that comes afterwards. And then at the end of that, after a few more moments of silence, invite people to check in. Now, the check in happens after this because you want them, people centered and present, to check in. So you're going to get less of all the things they've brought with them, because with luck, they've let that go in the meditation, and more of a sense of where they are within themselves at that moment. And then you introduce whatever the focused activity is. Now, you've got a bunch of scripts in the Dropbox that we gave you. There's 17 files in there, and there are probably 10 different ways of leading a small group. There are plenty of scripts in there on how to do it. But the basic one is that you have whatever point of focus you're going to have. Now, I will take the Soul Matters packet and take the questions that they have in there. They have 10, 12 questions sometimes, and put them on cards, and put the cards on the table face down, and invite people to draw a card and look at the question that they're going to reflect on for themselves and share with the group. If they don't like the question they drew, they can put it back down and try another one. So, but to find one question that moves them, that they want to explore by sharing how it touches them. And so after they've selected their questions, you invite them into silence and allow the first person that feels moved to speak. And they speak uninterrupted. No discussion, no questions. You're just to deeply listen to them. I say with the ears of your heart. You listen to them with an open heart. And when they're done, you take another moment of silence and express gratitude for what they've shared and for what has moved you and what they've shared, and invite the next person that feels moved to share. And you'll do this until everyone in the group has an opportunity to share. And then after everyone's had an opportunity to share, you ask the question, is there a larger story here? What are the common threads that we've heard in all these responses to this question? Does it remind you of a story, a myth, a Bible verse, a poem, a movie? Just what is it that might reflect all these individual pieces in a larger piece? And then more silence. I think you get this, that it's kind of silence, reflection. And after that, invite people to share how they would like to be seen by the group between that now and when they meet again. In a Christian tradition, you'll ask them how they want to be prayed for. But how would you like them? How would they like you to see them? What invitation are you giving to them?
Hmm.
to see you as going through your day more peacefully, to see you as succeeding on this test that you have to take, whatever it might be, but it's an invitation. And then silence and some kind of closing reading.
Hmm.
And that's it.
Hmm.
Um, I guess it's a 90-minute max for the group because in terms of holding attention. Now you can do exactly the same group online
Hmm.
with a group of people. And the process is the same. You have that one Fetzer article on sacred space, online sacred spaces, creating those. So, um, but um, but you can do it that way. It's harder hybrid. You can do it hybrid, but it's harder to do a hybrid
Yeah.
um, than with a group of people.
Yeah.
You want to make sure that the space you select is safe. You don't want a room that people have to walk through to get to the restrooms or to get to the supply closet. So you want a room that people will feel safe, held, uninterrupted in.
Yeah.
Um, and you may, before the first group, you may want to spend some time putting together your covenant, the aspirational covenant of how you aspire to be with one another.
Hmm.
And that helps as well to kind of convene these groups. These groups may be different people each time you convene them. So it's not a group that's going to go steadily through all the way through the year or however often you do it. So it should be a group that you can invite anyone into, um, whether they've read the materials
Hmm.
or not,
Hmm.
because it deepens the relationship among the people within the congregation,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you can experience it, you can see it. There's an opportunity to share in a way that they don't usually get to share.
Hmm.
Certainly not in friendship circle or at coffee hour.
Yeah, or even traditional small group ministry, which is
Yeah.
often more head oriented still, and not those opportunities for the kind of connection you're talking about, like looking for the larger story is connecting all of the stories, all of the responses you've heard, and also just asking people how they want to be thought of between, in the coming weeks. So it does a little bit more than you find in a traditional um, small group ministry.
I had a participant tell me one time, it never occurred to me that anyone would think about me.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, that's kind of a profound statement when you think
yeah,
about it.
yeah,
That here's someone that never imagined anyone would be thinking of her when they weren't together. So,
yeah.
um,
And yeah, and it's just a really good opportunity for somebody to bring a little something from their spiritual life, perhaps, to their religious community in the form of this small group, and understanding, like Sue just said, that never occurred to me that I would ask somebody in our congregation to at least be thinking of me as I go through, the coming weeks. Um, so thank you. And then um, I'll just say quickly about the examples we have for this, Sue, and then we can talk about how you use this process for the actual worship planning teams. But we've talked about soul matters. We've talked about touchstones. We've talked about spirituality and practice, and I'll put all the links for these things in the email that goes with sending you this. And Sue and I were just checking out Worship Web. You can do the same thing. You put your theme in for the your season, your liturgical um, point where you are in the calendar. You put the theme that you've chosen: hope, beauty, courage, compassion, whatever it is, and you'll get readings, reflections, braver, wiser pieces, a lot of stuff. So you could, like Sue said,
translating
yeah.
um,
So
prayers. So
yeah,
yeah,
and
I mean, it's helpful in putting together the packet, number one,
yeah,
when you start to do that, but you can also find things for the group in there.
yeah, right. So this is how you kind of put this all together, and as Sue mentioned, be open to different voices. than you have in your congregation, perhaps. So it's a great way to bring other voices in.
And other
Uh,
kinds of guided imagery is another way that you can get, if you're comfortable leading it, to lead a group through a guided imagery exercise and then have them draw it at the end, or write in their journal and then share it with one other person and then eventually with the group.
mhm,
But that's another way you can, another thing you can use. There's an example on writing a lament. You
mhm,
can use that process in
mhm.
a small group. And then at the end, invite people to read their laments, if they choose to, not for everyone, but if they
Yeah,
choose to.
yeah. And we're also including a link to how Unity Church Unitarian presents this stuff. Now, that's a large church with a staff. It's very, professional looking. So that's a pretty high bar. But even for a small congregation, you can do what they've done which is have a web page that has what they call a participants guide, which is basically just telling you how to use these resources. And it includes what happens in these chalice circles or these small group reflection uh, opportunities. Um, and then it has the packets for each theme as they're moving along. So it's an example of how to do that. And like I said, it's professional, but given all of these resources, like if you do soul matters, you have everything you need pretty much to put one of these packets together. So it's just how you're going to put them together. But the
And undoubtedly, you'll have someone in your community that really is a curator and loves to do this stuff,
yeah.
that loves to look and see what resources are out there, that they can bring to you or whoever is compiling the packet as resources for the packet. So
Mhm.
it's a job for someone who likes to work solitary, who likes to do computer work, who can just, send you 10 pages of resources and then you can weed through them and decide what you might want to
Hmm.
use in a packet that you would share with your
Yeah,
community to use for
yeah,
reflection. So
yeah. And I think we'll get them also, Sue. Let's just get them. Uh like you have access to a lot of poetry every day because you subscribe to a lot of services and things like that. So um that's a great thing for people in the worship team to be doing because it's a spiritual practice in and of itself is to, just to be always looking for this stuff and bringing them into your heart and mind. Um and it's also a great way just to find those poems, those readings, things like that. I came across a great one on interdependence just in my mailbox. It was Kate Bowler. Just had a little reading about interdependence, so they're out there and available. And as I said, this is what can become a spiritual practice for the people on the worship planning team. This is your chance to do a spiritual practice. And it's a communal spiritual practice because this group process we just talked about, it's a process that the worship team can use um, as they're choosing themes, as they're discerning what to include in the worship service, what to include in the worship packet. So do you want to say a little bit more about that, Sue?
well, it's a process of discernment and using the same process with the teams. And you start with the silence, a meditation, lectio, mindfulness, whatever you would choose to do, and silence after that, and then invite people to check in, and then begin to think about um, what your agenda is. Build your agenda so that it's written down so that people can see what the agenda is, and then go through whatever it is you have to go through in terms of the schedule, in terms of the events, but doing this from this grounded centered place as opposed to, oh, these are tasks we have to get through, who's going to do them, how can we get this done. It's a huge difference. um, there's a text out there called Contemplative Youth Ministry. It's an old one, um, but and written by an evangelical, but he talks about how he did youth ministry. And um, 30 minutes before the youth group would convene, the leaders of the group would sit down, have some silence, have a centering activity, and see all in their mind's eye, see all the members of the group, surrounding them with their heart's energy. and inviting them to come and be their best self within this group. And then they would do the group.
Mhm.
Um, Business groups have done this and realized that the time they spend up front in these centering activities cuts the amount of time they need to do business. And it's counterintuitive because the reason they don't do it is they say, well, we don't have time because we have so much other stuff to do. But it actually cuts the time because it gets people focused on the task at hand, on the sacred work that they're there to do. And you've allowed them to kind of let go of all the debris from the week and the day and the trip to the church or the trip to the study to get online, that they carry with them. You've given them time to kind of let that go and to bring um, both their heart and mind to whatever the task is
Mhm.
that's to be done. So
Yep.
um, it has an effect of really spiritually deepening the whole community. You know, it it begins to deepen within. It's a percentage effect. If so many people do end up doing this or participating in this, it begins to affect the whole congregation.
Mhm.
And so the congregation becomes that way. What I've seen in mine is people have closer relationships. Um, we don't have a minister. We have, they've been lay led for 18 years. The issue of pastoral care is coming up.
Mhm.
I said, "No, I want us to get a minister." I said, "We don't have a minister, so there's a lot of stuff that we can't do." Well, they've decided and they figured out that they could have a pastoral care box where people could put their concerns in the box, and um, and and they could be read out during the service by whoever is the worship associate could share it with the congregation. So that would have been unheard of 12 months ago in that congregation.
Yeah.
They wouldn't want that done. Now it's pressing, and they say, well, we really want people to know when we need to hear from them.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the ripples that go through the community as you brought these spiritual deepening through the worship of the small groups into
Yeah.
the community.
Yeah. And with the small groups that you're convening seasonally to go along with thematic worship services, it's good for people to have facilitators there. And at least when you're getting started, those facilitators are likely, uh, possibly could be the people who are on the worship team. So experiencing this amongst yourselves in the worship team will give you the experience to be the facilitator leading some of these groups. Um, but we don't want to overburden the people on the worship team. And our goal always is that more and more people learn how to facilitate these groups. So one of the things we recommend is whenever you're doing a group like this, you're just kind of keeping an eye out for the participants who really seem to get it, if you know what I mean. They're they stay within the container that you've held. They don't go off on tangents. They taking it very seriously. They hold the silence well. um, and they may be people that have led groups in other capacities. They might have been doing chalice circle, more traditional chalice circles, or small group ministry. So over time, the vision is as you have more people involved in these groups, you begin to identify the ones who can lead these groups. And that's part of that, helping this approach spread throughout the whole congregation and all aspects: government, social justice, faith development.
And create a script.
Yeah,
Have your script that the people can have so that they don't feel like they have to remember what every single step is. These
yeah,
groups, one of the attractions of them is they don't require a lot of advanced preparation. They do require 10 to 15 minutes of silence before you go into the group to lead it,
settling your heart,
so that you're
focusing.
settling yourself so that
Yeah,
you're able to hold that space with the group. But it doesn't require a lot of advanced preparation or reading. Um, so that's attractive to people because they can say, oh, okay, I can give an hour and a half two hours every couple of weeks to
Yeah.
a small group.
Yeah.
And it, depending on the size of your
Right.
congregation, it will dictate how many groups that you might want to offer.
Yeah.
Um,
And, you know, I'm in a small congregation, let's just say a small congregation of 50. I was just looking at the congregations I work with. I work with a lot of congregations with 50 people. If you convened three groups of around 8 people, you've got almost half of your congregation participating in this, which could make a huge effect on the tone and the spirit and just the general feel of your religious community. And that would only require 3 meetings with one or two or three facilitators, somebody who's willing to cover to make sure each one of those meetings has a facilitator. So I think this could have a huge impact on a small congregation, and I think at Unity they've got it set up, you know, where they're having a huge impact on a large congregation.
in your Dropbox, there's a it's called Pathways Small Group Session. Pathways was the new member track at the church I served, and we invited them to come to a series of small groups on the principles. So there was one principle done each group, and it was open, so anyone who had gone through the initial 4-session course was invited to come to this. This is like kind of Pathways Part 2. And I trained worship committee members and membership committee members on how to lead these small groups. And we only needed 2 of them each session, but they all came every session because they really liked the process. And the process was simply, I invited someone who I thought lived a particular principle. I mean, someone who had that inherent worth and dignity of every human being was led their life. So I invited someone that did that to share for like 10 or 15 minutes with the whole group. Then we had kind of a library online of poetry or short readings that reflected the principle. So they went into, after they listened to this person, they went into their small groups. The facilitator had led them in a bit of silence and used the reading or the poetry to lead essentially a lectio about, and the reading was related to whatever that principle was, to lead a session of lectio. And then people were invited to share what had been moved in them by the speaker, by the poetry, whatever. And it like I said, the leaders kept showing up every week, every month, because it fed them as much as they gave.
Yeah.
That's part of what you might find out.
Yeah, that's I think that's one of the important things here is if you do go down this path of doing spiritual deepening through communal spiritual practices, both the worship and these small groups, this becomes part of your spiritual practice, and it changes a lot. It changes how you interact with your community. You become better listeners, not just in church, but at work and elsewhere. You know, this is a place where being part of your religious community can really add to your life. It can really change your life in ways for the better.
Well, it's particularly critical now because of the amount of trauma we've absorbed for the last 4 years, politically, pandemically, wars, natural disasters, that people are coming to church needing healing, and this is the kind of way we can help provide healing.
Yeah. And I'll also say this breaks up the way we've been doing things in the past. And there's about 60% at least of the population of the United States who do not like what church is and what church is about and how things are done. So to break that up and do things differently is making room for those people who might not want to come to church right now. And so having both a worship service and having that small group opportunity, you're doing something different, but I think that's something that people really need, like Sue just said, and something that can help. I'm not looking to grow our communities, but at least sustain our communities and actually offer something of value to the people in your community of all ages, because this is not a generational specific way of doing something. It's a multi-generational way of doing something. So I think that's about it, Sue.
We covered it.
Yeah. So, and we also mentioned then during our Saturday session, so this for our final session coming up, we're going to be talking about social justice and how you can be bringing social justice into this whole um, context, which is an important thing because, if you're doing a theme on compassion, both in your small group, say, and in your worship service, how are you expressing that compassion in your community? What groups are there that you might be able to support and partner with? Or has there been an initiative that you've been doing that could get a boost by having a different kind of approach to it? So this just makes room for what we do in social justice work. And also we're going to send a video of an interview we did with the ministers are doing a group called Nourish, and it's bringing the dinner church concept to our UU congregations. And we'll talk a little bit more about that on Saturday as well. But if you can take a look at that video before then, that would be great.
Well, and a little bit about language, because I know some of us are concerned about how
Mm,
our community can shy away from traditional religious language. The meditation we did at the beginning of this was loving kindness. There wasn't any
mhm,
God language in it. There's a lot of ways to practice this without um, using words that might trigger some people. But the more they get used to practicing this, the less those words trigger,
mhm,
which is interesting. So
mhm,
you can find other ways and other language, like writing the lament. It means that the first thing is to call on the divine. Well, I'm with the group that had some humanists in it. They said, I wouldn't call on the divine. I don't believe in the divine. I said, well, call on whatever embodies that energy for you.
mhm,
Um, call on the trees. And
mhm,
that kind of startled them. But yeah, they wrote a beautiful lament calling on the trees
mhm,
and calling on nature. So that
mhm.
was what they considered the divine. So it's
Yeah.
helping people both embrace language that they can feel included, invited into rather than pushed out of, and using language that invites them into a deep process that doesn't have any of those triggering words that
Mhm.
might
Yeah.
have people shut down so that they're not listening.
And that's a great thing too for to talk about in your worship planning team is like, how can we talk about this in language? We know our congregation, we know what the trigger words are. How can we talk about this theme using language that everybody can hear and be able to talk with each other about that's part of that discernment process as well. So, okay, Sue?
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you all. We'll see you this coming Saturday.